Billionaire pretends to be a poor security guard to find love in his father's company. She brought him a bottle of cold water, not knowing the man she called security was actually the billionaire heir watching her heart. And the other woman? She cursed his mother, mocked his clothes, and dreamed of marrying a fortune, never realizing her arrogance was sealing her downfall. In a world where love is often priced in gold, one man dared to wear a uniform, to find a heart that wouldn't lie. This is not just a love story. It's a test of humility, character, and what it means to be seen when you have nothing. The title, she fell in love with the security guard, not knowing he was the billionaire's son. The city of Atlanta pulsed with life beneath the summer sun. High-rises sparkled like glass crowns, and down in the heart of the business district stood a powerful empire, built by one man, Raymond Whitmore, known to most simply as Chief. A self-made billionaire and the founder of Whitmore Global Holdings, Chief was respected for his brilliance, feared for his boldness, and admired most of all for how deeply he loved his only son. That son, Dr. Lawrence Whitmore Jr., or Larry as Chief efficiently called him, had just finished his medical degree abroad. He was everything a father could dream of. Tall, brilliant, charismatic, and kind. Women fawned over his smile. Newspapers had once called him America's most eligible heir. But Larry never paid attention. He wasn't looking for someone who wanted his last name. He was looking for someone who'd love him without knowing it. And when his father called him that June morning, their conversation planted the seed for a plan that would change everything. "My son," Chief said warmly over the phone, "you promised me, remember? After you graduated, it would be time to settle down. I've got my eye on two brilliant women, both working in my company. Smart, elegant, respectful. I think either could be a great match for you." Larry laughed softly. "Dad, are you matchmaking again?" "I'm suggesting," Chief replied with a smile in his voice. "The final choice is yours." But after the call, Larry's heart wasn't settled. He paced the balcony of his New York apartment, looking out at the skyline he had conquered academically, professionally, and yet emotionally he felt hollow. The image of women pretending to care, loving his wallet more than his words, haunted him. It had happened before. At Harvard, in London, in Dubai. Girls who said all the right things until they learned he wasn't just Larry, he was Larry Whitmore. What if he whispered to himself, "What if I show up as no one? No suits, no Rolex, just a plain man. Would any woman still choose me then?" The idea was reckless, insane even, but that's exactly why he liked it. By the time he flew back to Georgia the next week, his plan was set in motion. With his father's secret blessing, Larry traded in his designer clothes for a navy blue security uniform and a dorm room in the back of the corporate property. His name badge read L. Wilson. And just like that, the billionaire's son vanished, and a low-paid security guard took his place. On Monday morning, employees walked past him like he didn't exist. All except one. Sandra Bell. She was graceful without trying. She greeted him kindly, said good morning with a softness that felt sincere. One afternoon, she even handed him a bottle of cold water, sweat glistening on her brow from rushing between meetings. "It's hot out here," she said with a smile. "You're doing a good job. Stay hydrated." Larry stared at her, stunned. He had no idea who he was, no clue she'd just touched the heart of a man who could buy the company she worked for, and yet she treated him with dignity. But the other woman, Jessica Blair. He strutted past him like he was trash on the pavement. Her heels clacked loudly. Her perfume entered rooms before she did. She never looked at him, never said a word, except once. "Gonna grip me again," she snapped. "Your breath smells like He wanted to laugh, but his heart ached, not for himself, but for how quickly people judged by uniforms instead of character. The days unfolded like a silent movie. Larry watched both women from his post, Sandra helping an intern carry coffee, Jessica gossiping loudly about becoming Madam Whitmore soon. Sandra stayed late to help a colleague finish a report. Jessica demanded others be fired because she didn't like their tone. It was clear. One had class written on her resume, the other had kindness written in her soul. But it wasn't over yet. Jessica still believed she'd be introduced to the billionaire's son. She bought new dresses, practiced her laugh, even bragged at the company cafeteria. Once I marry the boss's son, all these nobodies better bow. Larry was silent, watching, until the day Jessica crossed the line, insulting the mother he had lost, the father who had raised him alone. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just whispered, "You've shown your true self. Thank you." And he walked away, because he knew the day of revelation was coming. Soon Jessica would knock on the Whitmore mansion, dressed in red, expecting diamonds. And she would find the man she mocked, sitting in the seat she thought she deserved. Not as a guard, but as the heir. Section 1. The sun dipped low over Atlanta's skyline, painting the Whitmore estate in gold. Inside the expansive study, the air was thick with silent understanding, as Chief Raymond Whitmore sipped from his glass of aged bourbon and stared at his son. No longer the boy he'd raised, but a man about to launch a plan that could either reveal true love or break his heart. "You really want to do this?" the old man asked, voice low. Larry stood by the fireplace, now dressed in jeans, an oversized security shirt, and cheap sneakers that squeaked against the marble floor. He looked nothing like the heir to a billion-dollar empire. "Yes, Dad, I need to know who she is when the lights go off. I need to know who would love me when I have nothing to offer but my name, and not even that." Chief Whitmore chuckled, shaking his head. "You're your mother's son, God rest her soul." There was a moment of stillness, a breath held in grief and love. Then Chief stood and walked over to the drawer of his grand mahogany desk. He pulled out a folded blue uniform and handed it over. "This belonged to Marcus, our most loyal gatekeeper before he passed. Wear it with pride, but remember, if you play poor, you must feel poor. No assistants, no fancy watches, no mistakes." Larry took the uniform with both hands, his eyes softening. "Thank you, Dad, for trusting me." "I'm not doing this for you," the old man said, eyes twinkling. "I'm doing this for her, whoever she is." The next morning arrived with a breath of fresh dew and the rumble of traffic, heading into Whitmore Global Holdings. By 7:00 a.m., the outer security booth had a new recruit. Wilskin was on duty. His blue cap shaded his face, and a walkie-talkie clipped to his waist buzzed now and then. He stood straight, clean-shaven, a clipboard in hand, just another face among the invisible. And just as Larry had feared, no one looked at him, no one except the cleaning crew and maintenance guys. They nodded to him like a brother. Then, at 7:42 a.m., she arrived. But her gray dress was modest yet elegant. She moved with a quiet grace, like someone who didn't need to prove anything. Her brown hair was tied back loosely, and her eyes had that soft kind of tiredness only hard-working women wore, one that made them even more beautiful. As she reached the gate, she paused. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. Larry blinked. "Good morning, ma'am." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't look down at people. It lifted them up. Then she walked inside, not knowing that she'd just greeted the man who could buy the building she worked in with a single swipe. Larry stood still for a second longer, then whispered, "You noticed me." An hour later, the woman in red arrived. Jessica Ford. Late, loud, luxurious. She walked past the gate without a word, her perfume slicing through the air like a warning. Her heels clicked like gunshots, and her eyes never moved toward Larry. He didn't see him. Or worse, she saw him and decided he wasn't worth the energy. "Noted," Larry murmured, jotting her reaction down in a small mental ledger. Inside the building, Jessica greeted everyone who wore a title and ignored those who didn't. By noon, she had already begun bragging to her colleagues in the break room. "Once Chief Whitmore's son returns and sees me, it's over for all you basic girls. I'm not just wife material, I'm investment material." Sandra walked in just in time to hear the end of the sentence. She shook her head gently and sat at the corner table, pulling out her lunch, a simple container of rice and beans. "Music," noted. "Sandra, dear, still bringing leftovers from home? Wow, some of us are preparing to dine with CEOs." Sandra didn't look up. "Good for you, Jessica." "Oh, it is," Jessica purred. Across the hallway, Larry passed by slowly, pushing a mop bucket. He had traded the guard post for janitor duty today to better observe the flow inside the office. He watched Sandra eat in peace, unaffected by the noise around her. Her presence was like soft music in a world filled with shouting. 3 days into the plan, Larry had already learned more than he bargained for. Jessica had been flirting shamelessly with Mr. Raymond, the interim company liaison his father had appointed to help keep the secret. He'd begun calling himself the future Mrs. Whitmore, even though she hadn't met Larry. Every time she passed Sandra, she would make snide comments, sometimes loud enough for the entire office to hear. "You really think the chief's son will fall for humility and hand-me-down dresses? Please. Men like curves, confidence, and women who know how to spend money, not save it." But it was Sandra who brought Larry a cold bottle of water on Friday afternoon. "You've been standing out here all day," she said softly. "It's hot here." Larry took the bottle slowly, eyes lingering on hers. "Thank you, that's very kind." She shrugged. "It's just water." "No," Larry said quietly. "It's not just water." Their eyes met for a second too long. Then she smiled genuinely and walked away. That night, back at the Whitmore estate, Larry told his father everything. Chief listened without interrupting, sipping his tea like a man watching a live theater production with no commercial breaks. Jessica insulted the janitor, the secretary, and even the cleaner who spilled coffee. But Sandra brought me water, Dad. She talked to everyone with respect, even the mail guy. And she thinks you're broke? And thinks I'm brokely nodded. "Then, my son," Chief said, setting down his cup, "keep watching, and when you reveal yourself, do it like a king." Meanwhile, Jessica was growing impatient. The chief's son hadn't shown up yet. Rumors started flying. Maybe he was already in Atlanta. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he was the mysterious man in the finance department. Her eyes darted constantly, always searching for someone who looked rich enough to marry. And just when she started losing interest in the chief's son, her sights turned to Mr. Raymond. "He's handsome, he's here. Why wait?" Her new plan had begun. He started bringing coffee to Raymond every morning. She wore tighter dresses, bolder makeup. She spoke louder when he was near. Sandra noticed. So did Larry. But neither said a word. The plan was still unfolding. And the truth? It was waiting just around the corner. Section 2, the text that changed everything. Night fell over Atlanta, wrapping the Whitmore estate and its towering business empire in a hush of anticipation. Inside the small security quarters at the edge of the corporate compound, Larry Whitmore sat on a narrow cot with his back against the wall, his phone in hand. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. How do you text a woman who thinks you're a broke security guard but somehow made you feel like the richest man alive? He looked at the screen again. The message was short, honest. "Sandra, I know I'm just a guard, but I'd really like to get to know you better. Could we talk sometime, just the two of us?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then exhaled and dropped the phone beside him. Across town, in a modest apartment lit by a single lamp, Sandra Bell sat cross-legged on her sofa, her dinner untouched. She was staring at her phone. He'd read the message twice already. Her heart thumped, not in alarm but in the soft, slow rhythm of something she hadn't felt in years. Someone saw her. Not her clothes, not her job. And that someone was the humble security guard who always stood at the gate like a soldier, even when people ignored him like he was part of the architecture. He picked up the phone. He typed again. Then Fago. He'd like that too. "Let's meet after work tomorrow behind the East Garden, near the loading dock. It's quiet there." The next morning, Larry stood at the gate, with the calmness of a man who'd just been given something money couldn't buy. But Sandra walked in. She didn't greet him like usual. She just glanced at him, with a secret in her smile, and kept walking. And it was that look, subtle as it was, that made the whole day feel like music. Jessica, meanwhile, was spiraling in her own soundtrack, chaos. She had worn a blood-red pencil dress so tight it looked vacuum-sealed. Her heels stabbed the marble floors like accusations. Her mind obsessed with one thing. Where was Chief Whitmore's son, and why hadn't he shown up yet? To her, the entire building was a stage, and she was the only star. Everyone else was background noise, especially Sandra. So when she caught Sandra smiling quietly at her desk during lunchtime, it grated her nerves. "What's with the little grin?" Jessica sneered as she passed. "Just having a good day," Sandra replied, barely looking up. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "You don't get too comfortable. Good days don't last forever." Via christened peon. The office lights dimmed. Employees poured out into the parking lot like a retreating tide. Inside a dimly lit corner of the East Garden, Larry waited. His hands were in his pockets, his cap pulled low, his heart racing. And then Sandra stepped around the hedge holding her tote bag, her eyes warm and uncertain all at once. "Hey, she said gently. "Hey," he replied, "thanks for meeting me." They stood there for a moment, awkward but tender, like teenagers again. "So," Sandra said, brushing hair from her face, "you wanted to talk?" Larry nodded. I've noticed you, and not in a weird way. I mean, you're kind, you treat people like they matter, and you smiled at me. No one ever does." Sandra laughed softly. That's a pretty low bar for compliments." "Maybe," Larry said, "but it mattered to me." She looked at him now, really looked, and for the first time saw the sincerity that made her chest tighten just a bit. "I like you," Larry said, voice almost a whisper. "I know I'm not much, but if you'd give me a chance, I'd like to see where this could go." Sandra's breath caught, and for a few seconds she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she replied. "I thought maybe you were just shy, or already taken." "No," Larry smiled, "just cautious." "Well, me too." They sat together on the stone bench under the hibiscus bush for nearly an hour, talking about everything but their jobs. She told him how her mother raised her alone, how she still sends money home. He told her, carefully edited, that he grew up in a strict household where expectations were heavier than gold. He didn't lie, but he didn't tell the whole truth either. Sandra smiled. "Do we tell people about this?" "Let's keep it between us," Larry said gently. "At least for now. You know how people talk." "Especially Jessica." She nodded. They laughed, together, not like co-workers, not like a guard and an executive assistant, like two people who had just discovered something sacred. But they weren't alone. Unbeknownst to them, a shadow had followed Sandra that evening, one with sharp heels and a sharper tongue. Jessica had paid the janitor's niece, a cleaner named Mimi, to watch Sandra closely. She wanted dirt, and tonight she'd found it. Mimi snapped a photo. "New figures. Too close. Too happy." He sent it straight to Jessica's phone. Back in her apartment, Jessica screamed, threw her wine glass against the wall, the pieces scattered like her pride. She thought with saying the God that nobody, while I'm still waiting for the billionaire son? He paced the room like a woman on fire. "This witch is going to ruin everything. I need to expose her, humiliate her, and when the real son shows up, I'll make sure he never even looks in her direction." But what Jessica didn't know was that the guard Sandra had just fallen for was already the heir. And his patience was running out. The next few days turned into a secret symphony. Quick smiles exchanged by the time clock, a shared sandwich behind the stairwell, a handwritten note slipped into a locker, "Thinking of you today." But Larry was flying high. For once in his life, he wasn't being pursued for his net worth, his last name, or his future. He was simply loved. And that terrified him. "What if she finds out who I am?" he asked his father one evening. "Then let her find out," Chief Whitmore replied. "But let her find out on your terms, in your time." "And Jessica?" The chief laughed. "Oh, Jessica will find out too, but she'll learn something far more painful than the truth. She'll learn that some men are not fools, even when they dress like one." Then, it happened. The text. It came at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Jessica stormed into the HR department, her phone in hand. She waved it like a flag of war. "I have proof that your precious Sandra is breaking company policy. She's dating the security guy. I have photos, I have witnesses. I want her fired today." The room went silent. Sandra, who had been standing near the file cabinet, turned slowly. Their eyes met. Jessica smiled, victorious. But Sandra didn't flinch. She pulled out her phone. Dialed with the call on speaker. "Good afternoon, sir," she said calmly. Chief Whitmore's voice came through. "Sandra, how are you?" "I'm fine, sir. I just wanted to respectfully inform you I'm in love with someone. His name is Larry. He's..." Silence, and Jessica froze. Her jaw dropped. Then came Chief's voice again, calm, smiling. "I know, my dear, and I'm very proud of your choice." Jessica stumbled backward, her world crumbling in real time. "What? What did he just say?" Sandra turned to her, cool as ice. "Congratulations, Jessica. You've just lost to the man you thought was beneath you and the woman you tried to destroy." Section 3. The Reveal. Saturday afternoon. The Whitmore estate in Atlanta gleamed under the southern sun, its marble columns standing tall like silent witnesses. But inside, beneath chandeliers and polished oak floors, something more powerful than wealth was about to unfold. Truth. In the center of the grand living room, Chief Raymond Whitmore adjusted the cufflinks on his agbada. Every inch the dignified patriarch. Across from him stood his son, not as a janitor, not as a security man, but as the heir he was born to be. The name now matched the man, standing in a tailored navy suit, clean-shaven, polished shoes, and a calm fire in his eyes. "Dad," Larry said, his voice steady, no more hiding. "She deserved the truth." Chief nodded slowly. "And she will receive it, with grace. But brace yourself. There will be 2 women at this table today, and only one will walk away with dignity." Sandra arrived first. She stepped out of the modest sedan in a light peach dress, minimal makeup, and a heart full of curiosity. Her heels tapped gently as she walked up the mansion steps. No bravado, no performance, just the same quiet grace that first captured Larry's heart. The door opened. The butler greeted her with a bow. "Right this way, Miss Bell." As she entered the expansive living room, her eyes swept across the space. Golden lighting, antique portraits, high ceilings, and then landed on him. Larry. Not the man in the blue uniform. Not Wilson, the security guy. This Larry was someone else. Confident, polished, handsome in a way that took her breath away. Her steps faltered. I don't understand." "Ushaten, Mari. You're Chief Whitmore's son." He nodded slowly. "Yes. Everything you knew about me was true. Except the name. I needed to know if I was loved for who I am, not what I have. And you? You passed the test I didn't even know how to ask." Sandra's eyes welled up. "You let me believe you were just a guard. And you still chose me." He looked down for a long moment, then reached for his hand. "I chose your heart, not your type." Behind them, Chief smiled, but proud but silent. Then came the knock. The front door opened wide, and Jessica Ford stormed into the room like it was hers to own. Wrapped in red from neck to knee, lashes bold, lips glossed, she strutted past the butler and straight into the living room, not even bothering to knock. "Good afternoon, Daddy," she said with sugar-coated confidence. Chief raised an eyebrow. "Jessica, you're here." Her eyes scanned the room, then caught sight of Larry. At first she squinted. Recognition flickered, then shock. "What is the security man doing here?" she snapped, pointing. "Why is he dressed like that?" Larry stood still, hands calmly clasped. Sandra stepped aside. "He's not the security man anymore," she said quietly. "He never was." Jessica's mouth parted. "What are you talking about?" Chief finally spoke. "Jessica, meet my son, Dr. Lawrence Whitmore Jr. Schedule." Silence. Jessica stumbled back a step. No, that's not possible. This man, he's the one who insulted me at the gate." "No," Larry corrected. I let you reveal who you... You lied to me, she hissed. You tricked me. Larry shook his head. I gave you a mirror. You just didn't like what you saw. I treated you that way because you were pretending to be poor. And that's exactly the point, Chief Whitmore interrupted sternly. You treated him with contempt because you thought he had no money. You disrespected my staff, mocked the cleaners, and publicly humiliated Sandra. Jessica's eyes darted between them. But I didn't know. If I had known... If you had known, Larry said coldly, you would have lied better, smiled more, pretended harder. But deep down you still would have looked down on everyone you thought was beneath you. Please, Larry, Jessica begged, I didn't mean... You meant every word, Sandra interrupted gently. Especially when you said his mother was a fool, or when you called him a smelling poor boy. Jessica froze, the weight of her own words crashing down. It was anger, she muttered. No, Chief said. You were exposed. Jessica's legs gave out. She sank to her knees. Please, please just give me one more chance. Larry looked down at her with a steady gaze. You had your chance when I had nothing. But I didn't. And Sandra didn't care. He turned to Sandra. She gave me kindness without a price tag. You gave me cruelty the moment you thought I couldn't repay you. Jessica reached out. Please, Chief, talk to him. I was only trying to survive. I was desperate. Desperate people ask for help, Chief said firmly. You demanded a crown. He turned to the guards near the entryway. Scotty, escort Ms. Ford out. Jessica's voice cracked. No, please. Don't do this. Two guards gently but firmly helped her to her feet. She resisted for a moment, her heels scraping against the floor like broken dignity. Then she saw Sandra one last time. You witch, you stole him from me. Sandra's voice remained calm. I never stole anything, I was just... See. Then she added softly. And a woman who chases two crowns at once will lose her own head. Jessica's sobs echoed as the doors closed behind her. Inside, peace settled like dust after a storm. Chief Whitmore placed a hand on Larry's shoulder. Son, you've made your choice. Larry turned to Sandra. And I choose her. Sandra's voice shook, even after all of this. He smiled. Because of all of this. 1 week later, guests arrived in flowing gowns and crisp tuxedos at the Whitmore estate. The courtyard had been transformed into a garden of white roses, twinkling lights, and soft jazz echoing through the warm spring air. Sandra thought it was just a celebration dinner, until Larry stepped out in a black suit, with a rose and a ring. Sandra, he said, taking the mic, the day I met you I was invisible to everyone but not to you. You gave me dignity when I had no title. You gave me your heart when I had nothing to offer back. He dropped to one knee. No, I give you everything, will you marry me? Her knees buckled, her hands flew to her mouth, and then, tears falling, she whispered, Yes, yes, yes. The crowd erupted in cheers. Champagne corks popped. Chief Whitmore wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. That's my... Meanwhile, across town, in a small apartment, Jessica stared at a positive pregnancy test. Alone, unemployed, unloved. When she called Mr. Raymond to tell him, the line rang twice, then went. The next day she returned to his condo. The guard at the gate told her. Raymond moved overseas, with his wife, months ago. Jessica sank to the curb, phone shaking in her hand, whispering to herself. I had everything in front of me, and I lost it all. He looked at her reflection in the glass of a store window. But she didn't recognize herself in Lesson 4, Jessica's final fall. At length, rain tapped relentlessly on the broken window pane of a cramped apartment on the city's west end. Inside, the air was stale, thick with silence and shattered pride. A single bulb flickered in the kitchen. No scent of perfume, no soft jazz playlist humming from her Bluetooth speaker, no footsteps from admirers waiting in the hallway. Just Jessica Ford sitting alone on the edge of a mattress on the floor. The designer heels were gone. The red dresses, pawned. Only the echo of who she used to be remained, and one little white stick on the table. A positive pregnancy test. He had stared at it for 3 days. No man, no job, no money. And now, he whispered those words to himself, like a curse. When she first met Mr. Raymond, the temporary company liaison, she had thought he was her golden ticket. Wealthy, polished, connected. She flirted, seduced, pretended to be everything he wanted, a woman of elegance, a future wife. But he had never made promises, only smiles, only small talk, and one too many late nights behind closed office doors. And now, he was gone. When she went to his condo with the test in hand, the building concierge looked at her with pity. "Miss, Mr. Raymond no longer lives here. He relocated to London with his wife and kids." That night, Jessica stood in the parking lot for over an hour, phone in hand, calling. Voicemail again. "Umut, it's Jessica. I need to talk to you. Please, it's important." Click. Nothing. The next morning she walked through downtown in the same worn-out trench coat she had once mocked Sandra for wearing. People passed her without a glance. He stopped outside Whitmore Global Holdings. She stood across the street, staring at the glass tower where her entire downfall began, where she had laughed, bragged, humiliated others, all while dreaming of being Mrs. Whitmore. Inside those walls, Sandra Bell now wore her crown with quiet strength, managing one of the company's largest divisions, respected, admired, loved. And Jessica? Pregnant for Undercover. Later that week, Jessica sat in the waiting room of a local clinic. The nurse called her name, but she didn't move. Her hand trembled, her eyes were hollow. He wasn't afraid of being a mother. He was terrified of being alone with no love left to offer. He left before seeing the dot. A week later the phone rang. A familiar voice came through. Chief Raymond Whitmore. Jessica. Her body went cold. "Sir, I didn't think you'd ever call me again. I heard you've been through a lot." "It's all lies," she started quickly. "Raymond lied to me, Larry tricked me, Enough," Chief said gently but firmly. "This isn't about blame anymore. I asked you here because I believe every human deserves a chance to be heard, even at their lowest." Jessica's lip trembled. "Are you offering me a job?" There was a pause. "No," Chief replied. "I'm offering you a moment of truth." That Saturday, Jessica returned to the mansion. But this time she didn't wear red. She wore black slacks, a gray blouse, and flat shoes. Her belly was beginning to show now, a soft curve beneath her coat. She walked slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching the scene of their own crime. Inside the living room, Chief Whitmore waited. Sandra sat beside him. Jessica froze. She didn't expect it. "Good afternoon," she said quietly. "Come, sit," Chief said, motioning to the couch. Jessica lowered herself slowly, hands clasped in her lap. "Jessica," Chief began, "we know you're pregnant. We also know who the father is." "I didn't plan for this," she said quickly. "I was confused, desperate. I thought if I could just get close enough, I could secure your future through someone else's name," Sandra finished calmly. Jessica blinked, tears threatening to rise. "I've lost everything." "No," Chief said. "You've lost what was never truly yours." He leaned forward. "But that child is yours, and what you do now will define what kind of woman you choose to become." "I don't want to be like my mother," Jessica whispered. The room fell still. Sandra tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Jessica looked up, her eyes finally raw. "My mother got pregnant when she was still married to another man. The shame broke our family. People called her names, spat on her in church, and she raised me to fight, to take, to never depend on love, only position." He wiped her eyes. "Became everything I said I'd never be. I lied, I chased power, I destroyed people on my way up, and now I'm down here. I don't even know who I am." Sandra was silent for a moment. Then slowly she stood and walked over. He didn't say a word. He just sat beside Jessica and took her hand. Jessica sobbed, shoulders shaking. I hated you. Sandra nodded. I know, but I didn't hate you back. I just hoped you'd remember who you really were. Chief Whitmore stood. Jessica, you will not work here again. That door is closed. But another door might be open, if you're ready to walk through it. Jessica looked up. What do you mean? There's a small women's shelter in Savannah. They help women rebuild their lives. Education, counseling, housing. It's quiet, hard, but honest work. I'm offering a beginning. 3 months later. The breeze off the Savannah coast was warm and soft. Jessica stood beneath a wooden porch, looking out at the horizon. Her belly was round now. She wore a cotton dress, hair in a braid. No makeup, no lies, just a woman reborn. She taught free literacy classes to young women on Tuesdays. She served breakfast at the shelter every morning. She apologized to her mother, and in the evenings she wrote letters to her unborn child. Letters full of truth, not pride, not fantasy, just lessons earned the hard way. And once a week she received a letter back. Simple notes, encouraging, non-judgmental. Sometimes the fall is where we finally touch grace. You're not too far gone. Keep going. Jessica folded that one and placed it in a shoebox, next to a tiny pair of baby socks. Session 5. Sandra's first test as a Whitmore. Took a week after the wedding. The name Sandra Whitmore was now printed on embossed letterhead, etched in gold on the company's internal portal, and whispered reverently across Whitmore Global Holdings. But while the wedding was a fairy tale, her new life was not. Gone were the days of quietly typing reports or fetching meeting minutes. Sandra now sat at the executive table, in a room full of men who didn't believe she belonged there. She muddied into the seat, they muttered. Let's see how long she lasts. Larry, of course, believed in her. Chief Whitmore had trained her privately for weeks. But belief doesn't stop betrayal. And betrayal was already brewing inside the boardroom. Monday morning, Whitmore Tower, 18th floor. Sandra sat upright in the sleek leather chair, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits and polished shoes. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit, pearl earrings, and a stillness that was quickly becoming her signature. On the table before her, a file marked confidential. She opened it. Her blood went cold. Inside were invoices, expense reports, wire transfers, and buried among the pages, evidence of embezzlement. Not petty theft. Millions is appropriated from charitable foundation funds, the same foundation she and Larry had launched under her name to support women's education in Africa. Sandra's lips pressed together, her fingers clenched the pages. And then, she saw it. The signature. Samuel Grayson, the CFO of International Operations, rusted executive, and Larry's godfather. That even yet who? Sandra sat in the library of the Whitmore estate, the fire crackling beside her. Larry walked in, loosening his tie. You're quiet tonight. He looked up slowly. I found something today. Something big. Larry's smile faded. What is it? Fraud, niece? Larry's brow furrowed. That's not possible. He was there when I was born. He carried me on his back when I was 5. He's family. He's also forging documents, Sandra said, placing the file on the table. I double-checked with Nairobi's banking office. The numbers match. The money is gone. Larry exhaled, deeply, painfully. It will destroy him. This could destroy us, Sandra said, voice steady. The media won't separate his actions from our name. What do we do? He asked. Sandra looked at the fire, her reflection flickering in the glass. We do the hard thing, the right thing, even if it rips the fonde apart. She turned to face him. Especially then. Wednesday morning. Emergency board meeting. The room was electric with whispers. Chief Whitmore stood at the head of the table, stoic. Larry sat beside him, and Sandra, confident, unshaken, held the thick dossier in her hands. He stood. "Gentlemen, before we begin, I need to bring to your attention a matter of grave concern." The whisperer stopped. She opened the dossier. "Over the past 6 months, an internal audit of our Nairobi branch has uncovered misappropriated funds totaling $4.7 million. The money was siphoned from our Women's Education Initiative, an arm of the company that bears my name." Gasps. Eyes widen. Sandra continued. "Tracing the digital trail, our team confirmed forged approvals, fake shell suppliers, and falsified expense logs." "Who's responsible?" someone asked. Sandra turned a page. "The evidence points to Samuel Grayson, our CFO of International Operations." A stunned silence. Larry didn't look away. But Chief Whitmore closed his eyes, a long sigh escaping his lips. "He was like a brother to me," he murmured. Samuel Grayson, seated at the far end of the table, rose slowly, his face pale, his voice trembling. "This is a witch hunt. You can't—" "Sandra, I changed your diapers. You're my goddaughter by merit." Sandra didn't flinch. "And I trusted you, and makes this even worse." He opened the final page. "We contacted the Financial Crimes Unit this morning. They're launching a full investigation." "You went to the authorities without consulting me?" Chief Whitmore asked, voice rising. Sandra turned to him, eyes steady. "Because I knew you wouldn't. But sir, this is my name too now. My reputation, my foundation, and those girls in Nairobi, they trusted us. I will not let them be the price for our silence." The board sat in stunned silence. Then Larry slowly stood. "I support my wife's decision. She's doing what I wasn't brave enough to do." "Uncle Sam, I'm sorry." Grayson's face fell. Security was called. He didn't resist. As he was escorted out, he looked at Sandra. "You'll regret this. You think this company will let you lead after this mess?" Sandra stood taller. "No, I don't think it. I know it." That night, as the news broke, the Whitmore CFO cut in multi-million-dollar scam. New executive daughter-in-law exposes fraud. Sandra's phone buzzed non-stop. Some called her reckless. Some called her brave. But one message stood out. A private number. He opened it. It was a video clip from Jessica. In it, a soft voice said, "Sandra, Futudont, I saw the news. I don't know how you do it, but you've become the kind of—" Sandra smiled faintly, then looked at the framed photo of her and Larry on the fireplace mantel. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. Mission 6. Enemies in high places. 2 months later, Whitmore Global Headquarters, Atlanta. The Whitmore brand had survived the storm. After Sandra exposed CFO Samuel Grayson's embezzlement scandal, the world didn't collapse. It listened. Media outlets praised her integrity. Stockholders voted her into a permanent executive role. Young women across the continent saw her as a symbol of modern grace and moral power. But not everyone celebrated her rise. Because every time a woman like Sandra takes her seat at the table, someone else loses control of the room. And in dark corners of the corporate world, resentment brews quietly. Monday morning boardroom. Sandra walked in wearing a charcoal gray dress, her heels confident but quiet. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual, too quiet, too stiff. She noticed Mr. Caldwell, head of global strategy. A man who'd once praised her to her face but rolled his eyes behind her back, lean in to whisper something to the woman next to him. Their chuckles were low and bitter. Knew something was off. And then she saw it. An envelope. Russ got her place on the table. No name, just stamped in red. Lawrence Whitmore. Sandra's hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. She looked to Larry at the far end of the room. He was deep in discussion with the legal team and hadn't noticed. She opened it. Inside, typed in plain black letters. Your husband was admitted to a private psychiatric facility in Geneva for a breakdown. What else is he hiding from you? Attached was a scanned intake form, stamped and signed by a Swiss psychiatrist. Sandra's vision blurred for a moment. That evening, in the Whitmore library, she waited. Larry came home late, briefcase in hand, tie half loosened, stress in his eyes. She didn't greet him with a kiss. Not this time. Just a whisper. "Jagin, July 17. You never told me." He froze mid-step. His expression shifted. Guilt, fear, heartbreak, all fighting for space on his face. "Sandra, I wanted to tell you, I was going to. I just didn't know how." He wasn't. He sat down slowly, his eyes avoiding hers. "While my mother died, I spiraled. I had panic attacks so severe I couldn't breathe. Couldn't eat, I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. So you went to a clinic." Dad arranged it quietly. He didn't want the press to smell blood. He swallowed. "I stayed for 2 months. What he did for a living made his heart think he might be cutting through the rooftop. "Because I didn't want you to see me as broken," he whispered. Sandra sat across from him, her face unreadable. "You think I loved you for your perfection? Larry, I loved you when you were sweeping the floor. You think a clinic stay would change that?" He looked up. "Then why do you look like you don't believe me?" He held up the envelope. "Because someone sent this anonymously, which means someone is trying to use your past against us, against me." Larry's face hardened. "About Jenny? Besides your father and a few doctors?" Sandra asked. They exchanged a look. "Mr. Codwell. Tuesday private lunch with Chief Whitmore." Sandra and Chief Raymond sat beneath the garden pergola, surrounded by jasmine and hydrangeas. He poured her tea quietly. "They're playing a long game, Sandra," he said. "They want to break me from the inside out." "No, they want to break Larry. They think you're just a wall in the way, but they forget you're stone." Sandra looked down at his teacup. "They're going to paint him as unscathed. You'll need to get ahead of it. Beat them with the truth." "You're saying we go public?" If's face was calm, but his eyes burned. "No, he needs to go public. A Friday to But Larry stepped up to the podium in a black suit. Sandra stood beside him, hand on his back. Journalists filled the room. Microphones. Lights. He took a breath. 3 years ago, I suffered a severe mental health crisis. I was diagnosed with acute anxiety disorder and clinical depression, compounded by grief after losing my mother. I spent time in recovery at a clinic in Geneva. I did not share this publicly, not out of shame, but out of privacy." He looked up. "But someone chose to weaponize my pain, and so today, I choose to reclaim it." Sandra's hand slid into his. The room fell into stunned silence. "I am not ashamed of my healing, and I stand with anyone who's ever needed help, especially men who've been told they're weak for asking." One reporter asked, "Mr. Whitmore, do you believe this affects your ability to lead?" Larry didn't answer. Sandra did. "No. In fact, it proves exactly why he's the right kind of leader, because strength isn't pretending nothing breaks you. It's being brave enough to rebuild." A hush fell over the room. Then, Back at the office, Caldwell watched the press feed. His smirk disappeared. He picked up his phone. Plan B. Yet even Diciando's office. Sandra sat at her desk, reviewing charity proposals, when an email popped up. Subject Kikadu Ugudmususkuts. The attachment was a document labeled Project Oasis. She opened it. Inside, a list of secret transactions linked to Chief Whitmore himself. Millions, hidden, over 2 decades. Her throat tightened. Her hands shook. Because now her enemies weren't just in the boardroom. They were inside the family. Section 30. The legacy file. Whitmore Estate midnight. The storm outside was soft. Just a low, persistent drizzle. But inside the estate study the air felt heavier than thunder. Sandra Whitmore sat alone beneath a stained glass lamp, the glow casting soft colors across her face. On the mahogany desk in front of her was a manila folder marked Only. The Project Oasis, confident. Inside, A collection of bank slips, offshore wire transfers, and internal communications, spanning nearly 20 years. Hidden funds, undisclosed trusts, money funneled quietly through companies in the Cayman Islands. The signature on the documents? The Chief Raymond Whitmore. Her father-in-law, her mentor, the man who had lifted her, protected her, taught her the rules, and then told her when to break them with dignity. What is this, Chief? Is this the real foundation Whitmore Global was built on? Her chest rose and fell with tension. She hadn't told Larry, not yet, because if she did, she'd risk shattering everything. The next morning he learned his home office. Sandra stood in the doorway, folder in hand. Larry was typing up a report, sipping coffee. He looked up, saw her expression, and froze. He didn't speak, just walked to his desk and laid the folder down. He opened. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then stopped cold on the wire transfer. No, this can't be real. Sandra nodded quietly. It's him. Larry stared blankly at the documents. This was during the same time Dad launched the Africa outreach. This money was supposed to be donations, endowments, building schools. Sandra sat across from him. It was real, the schools happened, but the extra funds, some of them were rerouted. Would he do that? Larry whispered. He already had everything. Sandra answered quietly. Because power doesn't seduce the poor, it seduces the rich. Later that day, the garden. Larry confronted his father. Chief Whitmore stood under a stone archway, trimming bonsai trees. He didn't look up when Larry arrived. I assume she showed you. Larry's jaw tightened. How long have you been lying to me? The chief paused, clippers in hand. Son, there are two kinds of legacies in this world. The kind that builds people, and the kind that protects them. I've built both. You stole, Larry snapped, from people who trusted you. The chief finally turned. I redirected what would have been taxed into future investments. Do you know how many politicians asked me for bribes over the years? How many hands reached into our company like it was a buffet? So you became just like them. Larry's voice cracked. I became better than them, Chief said coldly. I made sure our family could never be touched. That you would always have a kingdom no matter what storm came. But at what cost? Larry asked. If Sandra hadn't uncovered this, someone else would have, and we'd be finished. He turned back to his bonsai. Then maybe it's time I was finished. That night, Sandra's dilemma. Sandra sat on the floor of their bedroom, journal open, pen in hand. He'd been invited to speak at a global women's summit in Geneva, ironically the same city where Larry once healed in secret. She was now hailed as a face of transparency, a woman who exposed corruption, even when it cost her. But now, she held evidence that could destroy her husband's father, or destroy her credibility forever if it leaked later, and she had done nothing. The next morning, Larry's decision. He entered the room holding a USB drive. This is everything. The entire Project Oasis archive. If you want to turn it in, I won't stop you. Sandra's eyes widened. You're leaving this up to me? Yes, Larry said, because I can't see him as a criminal. But you'll see the truth for what it is. I trust you. Sandra stared at the drive. If we release this, the company could lose millions in penalties. Your father will be tried, publicly humiliated, everything he built, reduced to ashes. And if we don't? Larry asked. We were no better than the people we exposed. Geneva Kindigan Xingpong Shit. Sandra stood at the podium in a silk suit, camera flashes all around her. When I was younger, I believed leadership meant standing at the front. Now I know, leadership sometimes means standing alone. The crowd hushed. Today, I make a choice I never imagined, one that could cost me everything. She reached into her folder. This morning I submitted documents to the International Finance Bureau, evidence of financial misconduct inside my own family's corporation, not because I want revenge, but because justice should never depend on bloodlines. A wave of gasps. Even when it hurts, truth builds a better future than silence ever could. As she stepped down, applause broke out. Not the kind of clapping meant for show. It was the sound of respect earned in fire. Back in Atlanta, 1 week later, Chief Whitmore was arrested quietly, with no press at the estate. He did not resist. In fact, he shook the arm. Larry watched from the window, his expression unreadable. "He said to tell you he's proud," Sandra whispered. "Proud of what?" Larry asked softly. "That you didn't turn away." 3 months later, final boardroom scene. Sandra walked into the Whitmore executive boardroom, this time with the full board standing in applause. She had been officially named co-chair of the Whitmore Global Trust, the same seat her father-in-law once held. But unlike him, she earned it not by legacy, but by conviction. And when she sat down, she didn't straighten her posture to look powerful. She exhaled, because she knew he'd carried the weight of a king and refused to let the crown corrupt. Session 8. 6 months later, a quiet Saturday in Savannah. It was the first warm spring morning after a long winter. The sky above the Savannah Women's Shelter was clear, the garden alive with color. Inside, breakfast had just finished, and mothers were folding laundry while children played in the courtyard. And in the farthest room at the end of the hall, Jessica Ford held her son for the first time without shaking. His name was Eli. 5 pounds 6 ounces of second chances. She whispered into his tiny ear, "You're not a mistake, you're my beginning." For months, Jessica had disappeared from the headlines. After her downfall at Whitmore Global and the collapse of her brief secret affair with Mr. Raymond, she had vanished into the quiet arms of the shelter. She washed dishes. He volunteered in literacy programs. He prayed at night for the strength to rewrite his story, not for her score, but for the child growing inside her. And she never reached out to Sandra, not once, until now. At length, but Whitmore Global headquarters. Sandra Whitmore was in the middle of a meeting about post-crisis brand rebuilding when her assistant whispered, "Ma'am, there's a woman downstairs. She says her name is Jessica Ford." Sandra paused. The room went still. Did she say what she wanted? No, only that she has something to give you. And she brought a baby. A long silence. Sandra stood up, closed her folder, and said quietly, "Reschedule the rest of my day." 15 minutes later, Sandra's private office. Jessica sat in the corner, holding baby Eli in her arms. Her face was different now, softer. The sharp arrogance was gone, replaced by something grounded, something humbled. He stood as Sandra entered. "Suzanne, Jessica," Sandra said, carefully calm. "You look Life'll do that," Jessica said with a half smile, "especially when it kicks you hard enough." Sandra walked over and sat across from her. The silence between them was not hostile. It was fragile, the kind of silence only two women who've seen each other at their worst can sit in. "I came here because I need to say thank you." Jessica looked down at Eli. "For not humiliating me more than I humiliated myself, for not leaking the office footage, for not turning people against me when you had every reason." Sandra's voice softened. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. And for him." Jessica nodded. "I know, but still. If I could be." "So, what now?" Sandra asked. Jessica took a shaky breath. "Or a job. Or favors. Or favor." Sandra's gaze drifted to the sleeping baby, his fingers curled into tiny fists. "He is beautiful. He deserves better than me," Jessica whispered. "I'm trying, I swear, but the shelter can only do so much. I don't want him to grow up thinking life is just survival." She looked Sandra in the eye. "I want him to grow up knowing grace, real grace, the kind you gave me, even when I didn't deserve it." "What are you asking?" Jessica's voice cracked. "A scholarship, for his future, through the Whitmore Women and Children's Fund. I don't want my name on it. I don't want credit. I just want to plant something better for him." Sandra sat back, processing the words. This was not manipulation. It was 3 days later, Whitmore Foundation conference room. Sandra stood before her board of directors. Today I want to approve a new scholarship under the Women and Children's Initiative. It's called the Second Light Grant, naming after a board member, someone who once stood in the dark, but chose to find her light. It's for single mothers starting over, those who need not just help but hope. The board voted unanimously. That weekend Sandra visited Savannah. Jessica was in the garden, holding Eli. When she saw Sandra walk up, she blinked in disbelief. "You came?" Sandra smiled. "Of course." She handed Jessica a letter. Inside was a certificate for the Second Light Grant and a printed promise. Full education funding for Eli Ford through high school, college, and beyond. Jessica choked on her breath. "You named it after me." Sandra shook her head. "No, I named it after the version of you who came back." Jessica cried, and this time she didn't hide it. Andrew stepped forward. "I forget." Jessica's knees buckled. "Why?" "Because you changed. Because women who rise don't just lift themselves, they lift others." Session 9, When the Past Knocks Twice. Atlanta, late autumn. The leaves outside the Whitmore estate had turned gold and rust. But as Sandra would soon learn, some doors from the past, some knocked twice. One Wednesday afternoon, Sandra's personal office. She was reviewing a grant proposal when her assistant knocked gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's someone here. He says he knows you from before." Sandra looked up. Before all this. "His name is..." The assistant checked the note. "Mason Reed. He says he's from your hometown in Alabama." Sandra's heart stopped. The name Haven Ridge was one she hadn't said aloud in over 20 years. Not since she left behind the girl who once lived in a trailer with holes in the floor. The girl who buried a mother and survived a father who disappeared. "Ma'am, he says if you don't see him, he'll go straight to the press with a story titled The Secret Life of Sandra Whitmore." 20 minutes later, Sandra's private conference room. He stepped into the room with a slow, deliberate breath. And there he was, Mason Reed. Same storm gray eyes, same crooked smile, only now thinner, older, and holding a folder like it contained a loaded gun. "Hey, Sandra." "No one calls me that here," she said coolly. "It's Mrs. Whitmore." "Right," he smirked. "Mrs. High and Mighty. Forgot all about Haven Ridge, didn't you?" Sandra sat across from him, calm on the outside. Inside, her stomach twisted. "What do you want, Mason?" "Closure. And compensation." She narrowed her eyes. "For what?" He opened the folder. Inside, photos of her mother's old gravestone, their trailer, and something else. A torn, yellowed birth certificate. Sandra Lee Holloway. Not Whitmore, not even Belle, her real buried name. "Your audience thinks you were raised in boarding schools, groomed for greatness, but that's not what I remember." Sandra clenched her jaw. "And what exactly do you think you remember?" Mason leaned forward. "I remember a girl who ran away the night her father vanished, who said nothing when they found blood in his truck, who never told the cops she saw what happened." "It was 13, Sandra whispered. "And now you're a queen," Mason said, sitting back. "And I'm the fool still stuck in the past. But you see, Sandra, secrets have value, especially when they belong to someone on magazine covers." That night, Sandra's bane. He stared at her reflection. The last night in Haven Ridge. Her mother's bruises, the screams, the broken glass. The way her father had dragged Mason's uncle, her mother's brother, into the trailer and never walked back out. He never told a soul, never said she saw the truck leave. Never admitted she knew where her father buried the man. She buried it. All of it. Until now. The next day, confrontation with Larry. He told him everything. Every word. And for a long time, Larry just stood at the window. Sighed. "So all this time, your past, your name, your story, it was all built on a lie." "Not a lie," Sandra said softly. "Just a wound. One I never thought I'd need to reopen." Larry turned to her. "Well, that didn't you to me?" Because I was afraid that once you saw the girl I used to be, you'd stop believing in the world. He walked over and knelt in front of her. I don't love you because you were perfect. I love you because you're real. But if this man tries to use your past to destroy your future, we fight back. Together. 3 days later, Sandra meets Mason again. He would eat up in public again. Sandra slid a document across the table. A one-time payment of $200,000. 0 cents. In exchange, you sign a full non-disclosure agreement and walk away. Forever. Mason looked amused. You think your money can silence ghosts? No, she said, but I think it can bury your greed. He glanced at her, then slowly picked up the pen. You always were a fighter, Sandra. No, she corrected. I'm a mother now. Of a child I didn't give birth to. A wife to a man I thought would run if he saw my cracks. And a woman who's done hiding. Mason songed. But just as she stood to leave, he added, You weren't the only one who saw what happened that night. Sandra stopped. What do you mean? I saw your father too. Afterward, in the woods, he gave me something to keep quiet. He reached into his pocket and handed her an old rusted key. To a safety deposit box in Haven Ridge. I never opened it. Thought maybe one day you should. The final scene, Haven Ridge Bank Vault. Sandra stood inside the dim vault room, key in hand. Inside the small box was a stack of letters, a photo of her mother, and one single page. If you're reading this, I'm sorry, I was a coward, Sandra. Tears streamed down her face, not for the crime, but for the silence that followed. It closed the box. I'm done hiding, all of it ends now. Subconscious acceptance, the grace at the end of the war. 6 months later, Whitmore Estates. The war was quiet now. No headline, no betrayals. No thribbit hid in manila envelope. Sandra Whitmore had made peace with the woman she once was, and the woman she had become. But she knew peace doesn't mean the world forgets. It means you remember, without fear. And today, as the morning sun poured through the estate's grand windows, she was preparing for the one speech that would close every chapter, before a new one could begin. The event, the 10-year Whitmore Global Foundation Gala. Location, Museum of Art. Guest list, 800 of the most powerful names in philanthropy, media, and legacy finance. But all eyes were on the donors. They were on Sandra Whitmore. She wasn't just co-chair anymore. She was the heart of it all. A woman who had weathered scandal, uncovered truth, saved the foundation from collapse, rebuilt a name, and somehow found compassion in places others would have planted revenge. Meanwhile, across the Makso town, a man released. At a quiet federal building, Chief Raymond Whitmore stepped out of a courtroom in a crisp gray suit. His prison sentence had been suspended due to Sandra's quiet legal intervention. Yes, he had committed fraud. Yes, he had misused funds in his early years. But his later transparency, foundation reforms, and Sandra's side testimony had changed the court's decision. As he stepped into the back of a waiting buck car, he turned to his driver. Take me to the gala. Back at the Gala Gafatsaon Gala. Larry adjusted Sandra's mic as she prepared to walk out. You sure about what you're going to say? Yes, Sandra replied. It's time I stopped speaking like someone afraid to lose power. Larry smiled. And speak like the woman who redefined it. He kissed his cheek. Always. The Scots light. Sandra's final speech. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. She stood at the glass podium beneath a towering floral arch of magnolias, jasmine, and white lilies. 10 years ago, this foundation began with a mission to educate girls across the globe. What we didn't know back then was that the people who needed to learn the most were us. Nods, camera shutters. I spent my life running from my past. From a town called Haven Ridge, from a name not even printed on your brochures. I was Sandra Holloway. I came from nowhere, and I was raised in a house where women whispered instead of spoke. The room shifted, faces leaned in. I married into a legacy that had secrets, and for a time I thought if I was just good enough, classy enough, educated enough, I could outrun all of it. A pause. A deep breath. But then I realized something. The most dangerous thing we can do is pretend we're perfect. The bravest thing we can do is become transparent before we are exposed. So tonight I say this. My family's legacy isn't money. It's accountability. It's a foundation built on truth. And that's a gift I want every woman and child we serve to inherit. The audience erupted in applause. Sandra paused. Before I leave this stage, there's someone I must welcome back. The doors opened. Chief Raymond Whitmore walked in. Not as a guest of honor, but as a man humbled by loss. Sandra stepped aside from the mic, walked toward him, and to the shock of many, embraced him. This, she whispered into his ear, is what grace looks like. He whispered back, "You became everything I hoped my son would marry, and more." They stood together on stage, past and future. No cameras dared to flash, because even reporters understood what reverence looked like. Later that evening, outside the gala hall, Sandra stood alone, her heels off, toes in the soft grass beside the fountain. Larry joined her. "You didn't just end a war tonight," he said, hands in his pockets. "He changed the rules of one." Sandra chuckled softly. "Toyota battles. We got a new life to build. Where do we start?" Larry held up a folder labeled Whitmore Center Proposed Campus Site, Haven Ridge, Alabama. Sandra blinked. "That's home," Larry said, "where we build not just scholarships, but safe houses, medical clinics, entrepreneur programs, all under your name." Sandra held the folder with trembling hands. "We're going back." "Not to stay," he smiled. "To rewrite the end and cushion, the final reflection of Sandra Whitmore. There comes a time, after the battles, after the betrayal, after the spotlight fades, when a woman must sit with herself and ask, who did I become through it all?" For Sandra Whitmore, that answer didn't lie in her title, her wardrobe, or even the walls of the foundation that now bore her name. It lived in the silent early morning hours, when she rocked Eli to sleep while Jessica rested in the next room. It lived in Larry's hand, the way he held it without needing to lead. It lived in the eyes of young girls from Nigeria to Alabama, who whispered her name like a prayer. She did it, maybe I can too. Sandra's legacy was not her perfection, it was her evolution. She was once a girl with no name. They were married into a kingdom of secrets. Then the queen who burned it down with integrity and rebuilt it on grace. But most of all, she was the proof that survivors don't stay broken. Good heart can make hard choices. And forgiveness, when earned and given freely, becomes the most powerful form of justice. Final moments, the Whitmore garden bench. Sandra sat with Chief Raymond Whitmore, now gray-haired, slower in his steps but lighter in his heart. Eli toddled across the grass with a butterfly net, and Jessica read beneath a tree with a smile no one thought she'd earn back. Larry walked up behind Sandra and whispered, "You were the revolution this family didn't know it needed." Sandy replied softly, "I just didn't want to pass down the silence. And that's the lesson for us all. This story of betrayal, loves, lies, redemption isn't just Sandra's. It belonged to every woman who's ever been underestimated, been told her past was a stain instead of a seed, loved someone flawed but stayed, loved herself enough to leave, or stood in front of a storm and said, 'You won't break me, I bend but I rise.' Which part of Sandra's journey did you relate to the most? Was it her silence, her strength, her grace, her fire? Leave a comment, let your voice be heard. Like this if you believe redemption is real. Subscribe to our story channel for more true-to-heart tales that heal, inspire, and empower.